Pre-order my book, American Evil, in the description below. Interestingly enough, this situation regarding the Thousand Year Door is very, very interesting. This is the first time in, I think, several years that we've seen the censorshitters, right? The people who genuinely believe that Nintendo is outright censoring video games, making them less Japanese. It's been a long time since we've seen them go after a major Nintendo release. Like, I think with the death of Niche Gamer and like them taking their comment section and going elsewhere, and groups like Attack on Action focusing on like other things, like the Nintendo narrative has kind of collapsed, right? Like, I don't think I've seen any serious accusations of censorship since like Tokyo Mirage Sessions, right? And that isn't to say that like this community doesn't bring up censorship constantly. You'll see them do this thing where every time some censorship controversy happens, they'll come out and say, oh, this is almost as bad as Fire Emblem Fates or Tokyo Mirage Sessions, right? They keep the narrative focused squarely on Nintendo, even when they haven't really done anything, right? Even those examples weren't particularly bad examples. It's crazy to me how often Promotions comes up in regards to this kind of narrative, because that was a fairly new release that nobody really cared about. And yet you do have a lot of people who genuinely seem to believe that the reason the game did not do well was purely because of censorship backlash, which is not the case at all, especially in the West, right? This is something I've been talking about a lot lately. I talked about a lot like back in the day, but it's kind of by the wayside in recent years, because Sony has built a reputation for being so much worse, right? That is, I think, the long and short of it, is that these people have migrated over to Sony because they've been doing some more ridiculous things with products like Stellar Blade and smaller developers. There are a lot of other examples out there that are worse than anything even like the most blatant Nintendo, evil Nintendo localizer has ever done, right? Uh, what it amounts to really is that the community could not keep the conversation regarding Nintendo negative, right? When you see people try to tell you that, like, oh, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild ruined their stories, they ruined the localization. It is true. That's my opinion as someone who played the localization and has looked into this stuff. Like it's just people exaggerating, and everybody knows they're exaggerating. No, everybody knows not to take them seriously, right? And now, right now, going into May, I'm recording this on May 1st. It seems like these groups of people are beginning to rally behind the next major Nintendo game. They are going after, or setting up to go after, a major Nintendo re-release, like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. You've already seen YellowFlash release a statement about how he's never going to pre-order any Nintendo game ever again, and how they ruined the experience and all this stuff. And I'm just sitting here thinking that, like, this isn't going to work, right? Like, you're seeing the backlash. Like, before we know what's been changed, we're seeing like the actual fan base. The people who have been asking for Paper Mario to come back for years and years. Like, we're seeing like players come out and tell these people, fuck off. And I find that really, really interesting, because one of the things the censorshitters always do, like Raging Eagle is really bad about this, is that they always pretend they themselves are the real audience, and that everyone else is like a secondary, or like someone who is just more interested in censoring things for a political ideology, right? Like, they always act like you're either with them or against them, right? And with Paper Mario, it's really interesting, because these guys are crying about censorship. They're crying about changes made. They're crying about like the original Japanese version. But the reality was, the original English release already did make significant changes from the Japanese version, right? The localization that everybody loved growing up and that everybody played growing up was already quite a bit different than the original Japanese. And so you have this really weird dichotomy here where the people who are very adamant that like you shouldn't make any changes in localization at all are in a really weird position because a lot of the changes made in that original localization of the Thousand Year Door made sense, right? You can't call Rock Hawk like Hawk Hogan in English, okay? Because it causes like likeness issues, right? For the actual person, right? You can't get away with like having Vivian be like I don't know, forced to dress up like a girl. I don't know exactly what the lore behind the Japanese version of the character was. So like she became a girl in the English version, right? You can't have like there have been like lots of things. There were lots of things that were adjusted or changed in localization, right? Just like there are in all Nintendo RPGs to a certain extent, right? Obviously, like there are very serious cultural implications that they have to consider with this stuff, and it's always happened, right? Like there's nothing weird, unusual, or wrong about any of it, right? And people really do need to understand that localization is a necessary process. It is not inherently evil. Like, I do want to emphasize this point going into this, like, before the controversy kicks off for real. I do feel as if we're seeing more and more that these people, the censorship grifters, the Yellow Flashes, the Raging Golden Eagles, like those guys, like, they ignore the very real, serious like politically motivated localization changes, stuff like the Jello apocalypse change, right? Things like Euden Chronicles localization, right? The fact that like the localizers seem to have forced like Marissa onto the cover art, even though she's not a major character at all, right? You have like real issues that developers are trying to do. Neil Druckmann still has a job. Like, why is that a thing? PlayStation still exists. Like, why is that a thing? Like, you have like real issues you could be talking about, but what do these people do? They complain about random line changes in Pikmin 2, in the Thousand Year Door, in like they try to convince you that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was censored, right? Like they have no evidence for that. Like all they do is just pretend like, oh, look at two, look at how attractive the characters are there. Like the fact that 3 doesn't have anywhere near the same kind of character design proves that it's been censored, ignoring the fact that basically all of like the extremely sexualized character designs into came from like the blades, and blades aren't really present in 3 in the same capacity. And like again, there's a lot of reasons why like 3 is a completely different game from 2 is what it comes down to. Like again, you keep seeing this with these people is that every single time they try to tell you that like, oh, we can, they try to tell you that like things are getting worse. Like Nintendo is going woke. Video games are over. Like I'm not buying anything. Oh, I'm the real audience. Meanwhile, like normal people are like buying and playing new Fire Emblem and Xenoblade games without even like knowing that there's a controversy. Like I do think that's the thing that to take into account when it comes to like these censorship arguments is that they leave no impact at all. Like not even like very little impact. Like because I used to I think back in the day they used to get like some traction with like the Tokyo Mirage sessions and the Fire Emblem Fates thing. Like I don't see anybody complaining about the changes made in like Pikmin 1 and 2. I don't see anybody complaining about the changes in the Thousand Year Door. And if anything, the Thousand Year Door is going to be really interesting because Paper Mario fans are not going to stand for people complaining about minor changes to text or how the story plays out, right? If anything, I would welcome a lot of changes to the Thousand Year Door, right? Like I think the idea of like adding new content and redoing the text might actually lead to some positive changes in that game, right? Like I wouldn't want it to be the exact same way it was back in the day, because of course there were lots of issues with a thousand year door. I've talked about this in the past. And of course I was like concerned about like the possibility that they may shove like woke stuff in there, but I haven't seen any evidence of that. Like not even with Vivian, weirdly enough. Unless there's like some weird reveal where like they try to pass him off as a tranny, like I don't see anything going off with that. And honestly, like Vivian's the one character in like the entire Nintendo catalog that like they could probably pass off as a genuine tranny. Like, but so it's not even really that big of a deal. Like, I don't think anything is going to like deter me from supporting the Thousand Year Door at this point. And yet you have these people like crying foul, like trying to cry foul, and you have like legions of the real fans who are willing to like call them out on this, because this is going to be a big deal for the Thousand Year Door fans, right? Because this is a game that hasn't been re-released in 20 years, and a lot of them feel as if the future of the Paper Mario franchise like hinges on this game's success, right? If this game does well enough, like they're going to have to return to the traditional Paper Mario formula, right? They think. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't necessarily think that would be a bad thing. So again, I 100% chance. Like I do think we're in for like a major shitstorm, honestly. And it's interesting because I do think the gamer gators, like the conspirators, the censorship, they are 100% in the wrong in this situation. Right? Like this is a really interesting situation in which they're trying to drum up a controversy going after people who are genuinely excited and looking forward to this game, right? Like I do believe the censor shitters are a bunch of grifters. I do believe they don't play or care about games at all. I do believe they have no idea what they're talking about, and that they really have no impact on the community at all. Like I am willing to stand up for the Paper Mario fan base, and I will address the situation as it evolves going forward.